You're listening to Consulting Logistics, presented by Aborn Company. I'm your host, MacNaught. Thanks for checking us out. All right, it's another Corona episode, and I know. I've talked about Corona a lot. We've talked about tons of interesting stuff, so please don't tune me out because I promise this is going to be something a little different, and it's more about a resource that I'm providing you. So not just interviews about Corona. I'm sure like the rest of you, you're sick of it. But I want to provide a resource because like as all 50 states have now begun the process of reopening, I'm sure there's a ton of questions you have concerning your operation and how to safely and efficiently open it. And at Aborn, we like to provide more than just managed freight. We take a controlled tower approach to logistics, and we give our clients resources on a variety of topics and issues they run into. So recently, we did a deep dive into reopening and created a slide deck that kind of just provides the most poignant like resources, the stuff that really addresses what supply chain should be doing, what transportation should be doing, that type of stuff. And just a device for the logistics operations of a company. So overall, the guide had a tremendous response. Tons of our clients were extremely excited about it. And they just found it truly, truly valuable. So what I wanted to do for you, my listeners and my viewers and my watchers, is provide you that resource that we gathered. Because I did the work, might as well just share it with everyone, right? So today, I'm going to talk through our guide to reopening and bring some of the Aborn experts to provide further guidance into just what we were discussing and stuff like that. So before we even start, I'm going to tell you where you can go to download the guide. If you just go to our website and go to aborninco.com/reopening, you can see all the resources that we provided for shippers. So again, you can go there right now. You can download the guide. You can see it and everything. But into what you're going to see in the guide. And to begin, I wanted to get someone who has just been working nonstop since the crisis began, and for a wide variety of freight. Aborn's president, Jill Clifford. And in addition to hearing about some of her experience during the crisis and what she's learned as a 30-year professional in freight, I think it's important to hear from others of what their concerns are regarding reopening. So I'm actually talking to Jill sort of about that. So as president of a company, what are your concerns about bringing employees back? How are you addressing these concerns?
I think for us as a company, my biggest concern is how people really feel about the situation. You know, we have folks that they're afraid, right? There's some fear and anxiety around getting sick, and there's also the same amount of fear and anxiety of potentially getting somebody else sick. So, you know, when this COVID thing hit, we immediately all went home and we stood ourselves up remotely. And, you know, we didn't skip a beat. We've been extremely successful working from home. And so really what we put out to the team, and again, it's because we all have different views and feelings about it. We also all have different families. You know, we have folks who have infants and toddlers and don't have childcare right now. We have folks who love being home and really enjoy that balance of life without the commute. And then we have folks who can't wait to get back to the office. And so what we've done is we've left it up to our team. So if you want to stay home. Because again, we've proven as a team that we can really work remotely and have the same amount of success as we had together. And conversely, if you want to be in the office, come on in. We have put together all the requirements by the state mandate. So everything's here for us. We have temp checks, we have masks, we have gloves, we have disinfectants. We have a process for, you know, cleaning work areas in the morning and at night. So really for us, it was all about the emotional well-being of all of us. And again, I think people have different opinions and views about it. So we've just left it up to our team.
Now, concerns from others. Have you heard any, especially from fellow shippers, or anything that you've heard them say that you kind of would be willing to share?
Yeah, sure. You know, I think the overall concern as an industry that we're hearing from our clients is, you know, really what is the new normal? You know, from an industry perspective, forecasting market conditions and the impacts of cost and service in transportation has been challenging for our clients. And so for the last 11, 12 weeks, we have been all over market conditions and communicating very clearly to our clients as to what's going on in the market. And it changes pretty rapidly, especially in the beginning of COVID. And it was really critical to us that we shared that information in a meaningful way with our clients so they could report internally. You know, you're like a deer in headlights if you don't have data and visibility, and if you don't have sort of kind of an expert on your team that's full-time managing market conditions. And that's what we were able to do for clients. But I think for shippers and receivers, and again, depending on the industry, man, it's been challenging for sure.
What do you think is going to be the biggest struggle, especially for transportation programs, as the nation starts to reopen?
Yeah, I think the biggest struggle is going to be forecasting. Again, what is the new normal? You know, we haven't seen something like this since 1918, and you know, the world is a very different place right now. So as industry comes back, what's coming back and how much of it's coming back, right? So if you're in supply chain or in transportation at an organization, you've been tasked with what is our sourcing strategy, and not just from a cost perspective, but are we going to change our sourcing strategy based on these conditions? And so I really think that's the biggest challenge we face as industry professionals, is really trying to understand forecast, budget, inventory, manufacturing, freight costs, and what is that all going to mean in the coming months? And I would say coming years, because you know, we don't know what industry is going to look like now and in the future.
So speaking to that point, just as someone who's had so much experience in logistics, what was something that you found like interesting during the coronavirus, especially because you were working, you were hands-on, you were talking to a wide variety of freight. What was something that interested you, or what did you find interesting, especially just given your years of experience?
Yeah, and so, you know, again, I don't think the world has been through something like this. And so it was a bit jarring in the beginning. You know, everyone's being sent home and our clients are like, what now, right? But, you know, for me, what was extremely interesting was the swing in the market. So, you know, the first 3 weeks, and it changed hourly, the first 3 weeks in the domestic market, really the rates climbed, capacity was squeezed, you know, and part of it was companies were shutting down with no notice because somebody showed up and was sick. So imagine all that going on in a supply chain over all kinds of companies. It was pretty jarring. And then a week later, you know, and the international market was pretty stable because China had been coming back already, having gone through the worst of their pandemic. And then it flipped. So then the international market, you know, the air freight rates, as the domestic market seemed to settle in and stabilize and rates stabilize, the international market, you know, air freight forwarding is up ×5. So I think interesting is a good word, because it is very interesting, and it's really, really, you know, we have the ability with our data to show a client what the trends were day over day and week over week. And so for me, that was really the most interesting, is really the shift in the markets and how fast they changed by mode.
So what about surprising? Was there anything that really surprised you with the carriers? I know that a lot of times we talk about the whole shipper carrier kind of dynamic. What surprised you the most during coronavirus that the carriers kind of did?
This is going to sound really silly, because we've been through some tough transportation times. And what I've seen in the past is carriers really taking advantage of that, in terms of the market gets really ugly and all of a sudden they're taking advantage by increasing rates. And what we saw, and you know, hats off to our carriers that we work with and that work for our clients, because what we really saw was they didn't take advantage of this COVID market. Did rates climb? They did, but they climbed in a predictable market environment where capacity was really tough. And if there were lanes where capacity wasn't tough, those rates didn't increase. And we saw that day in and day out and have the ability to measure it, which was really, really crucial as our operations team is working with carriers. Because when you have that visibility and you're having these discussions with your carriers and you're saying, look at, we appreciate you. We needed you in this time. And they really stood up. They really, really did. So for us, it was reassuring. The overall, like, we're in this together, right? And we all keep hearing that. But what I saw from our carrier base and the carriers that work for our clients is they supported us through a really ugly time, and they did not take advantage in terms of cost.
Yeah, that's vital. I think the
Mm-hmm.
last thing, and something that we talk a lot about on the show, is just there's a lot of inefficiencies, especially when it comes to supply chain and what's happening. Was there any inefficiencies in the supply chain that you saw kind of finally go away because of the new normal we had to transition to?
Yeah. There were definitely inefficiencies in that there was so much unpredictability, and it's still occurring today. As companies were adjusting to COVID and then adjusting to, are we going to open? And if we open, how are we going to do it? Adjusting to spreading out shifts in order to maintain social distancing. There were tons of inefficiencies. I think, this is, and it's still going, as industry is coming back, we're going to start seeing, one is, we're going to see more swings in rates. I think we're going to see rates spike again, especially in the domestic market. And I think we're going to see some carriers, especially in the truckload space, potentially go out of business. So there's still some inefficiency happening. The key, though, is really this strategic relationship with your carriers. Because as long as you can predict inefficiency to some degree, and you've got a carrier base that you're strategic with, and they are a partner in your supply chain process, they're going to be able to help you through that inefficiency. I think what we saw really is, if you're an organization and you're not working strategically with your carriers and you don't have data to support any type of strategic process, you were really in trouble through this pandemic, and probably still are, because now that whole predictive analytics you don't have. And you also don't have those relationships with your carriers where, if you're in an environment where you're just out spot quoting or really don't have sourcing, routing, and programs in and good communication, you are in some trouble for sure.
As far as recommendations go for you to create and maintain a safe operation for your team, I found that OSHA resource guidance of preparing workplaces for COVID-19 had to be one of the more cited from all the news sources. So in our guide, we provide sort of just some basic tips that they kind of wrote in there, but we also provide a link to go see it all. So definitely go in the guide. Again, abornandcode.com/reopening. But the link to the guide, the link to the paper that I'm about to talk about is all there, so you can always see it. But I think I wanted to go into this one section that I found extremely important, but tricky to understand. And I know we've heard a lot about personal protective equipment and how incredibly valuable it is. But in the OSHA guide, they kind of talked about how that's just one piece of the workplace control that's recommended. And it's not even the most important. Quote, the best way to control a hazard is to systematically remove it from the workplace, rather than relying on workers to reduce their exposure. During the COVID-19 outbreak, when it may not be possible to eliminate the hazard, the most effective protective measurements are, and this is listed from most effective to least effective, and that's with a grain of salt: engineering controls, administrative controls, safe work practices, which is a type of administrative control, and PPE. Again, most effective, least effective. Engineering control, administrative control, safe work practices, and PPE. There are advantages and disadvantages to each type of control measure when considering the ease of implementation, the effectiveness, and cost. And in most cases, a combination of control measures will be necessary to protect workers from exposure to COVID-19. So as mentioned, the first and what's considered to be one of the more effective measures is engineering control, i.e. keeping employees away from danger without the need for employees to change their behavior. Includes stuff like installing high efficiency air filters, increasing ventilation rates in a work environment, installing physical barriers such as like a clear plastic sneeze guard. Sure, it's more costly, but it's one of those things you don't require someone to make an action, which is always the most difficult thing, as we know. Next up is administrative control, which is more about changing work policies, stuff like your sick worker staying home, discontinuing non-essential travel, and developing a communication plans, which all under administrative control. But the one thing OSHA talked about that was interesting to me was providing worker education and training. Now, this is something I recently discussed with a group of shippers that have been kind of working on reopening, and the signs were encouraging. They really talked about how, to me, it was going to be one of the hardest parts, right? How do you get people to care about training, especially training that doesn't help them do their job? In fact, it probably hampers their job more or less. But from what the shippers were saying, there was a lot of participation and eagerness for these programs. So yes, there's an action required by a worker or employer, and so you're kind of at the mercy of people doing it. But there's a hunger for these types of controls. So don't skip over it because you think it's going to be something that's kind of a pain. From what I'm hearing and what we're starting to hear from more and more people out there rolling up their sleeves and getting open again, people want this. People definitely want this, and it's one of those things that OSHA, CDC, they're all saying, let's do it. The third type of control is safe work practice. Basically a type of administrative control. It's just you're reducing the duration, frequency, and intensity of exposure to a hazard, right? Safe work practices. In the age of COVID, this means personal hygiene, providing tissues, no touch trash cans, hand soap, or alcohol based hand rubs, and requiring regular hand washing and post signs everywhere. It's kind of what it is, right? Wash your hands. It's the most effective way. 20 seconds too, as we all know. Again, sorry, I know coronavirus is driving you all crazy, but here's what we're going to have to live, right? Lastly, and I think it's important to remember, lastly, in workplace controls is PPE. Here's what the OSHA guide has to say about it. While engineering and administrative controls are considered more effective in minimizing exposure to SARS-CoV-2, PPE may also be needed to prevent certain exposures. While correctly using PPE can help prevent some exposures, it should not take the place of other preventative strategies. So examples of PPE include gloves, goggles, face shields, face mask, and respiratory protection when appropriate. During the outbreak of an infectious disease such as COVID-19, recommendations for PPE specific to occupations or job tasks may change depending on geographical location. Updated risk assessments for workers and information on PPE effectiveness in preventing the spread of COVID-19. Updated risk assessment, blah, blah, blah. Employers should check the OSHA and CDC websites for regular updates about recommended PPE. So in our guide, which is at abornandcode.com/reopening, we've included a ton of those resources from the CDC that just kind of, that way you're not searching for it. Now, don't get me wrong, it's pretty easy. OSHA's really good at this stuff, but we included guidance like manufacturing for manufacturing facilities and employees. We also included some resources for businesses like workplace signage, screening guidelines, and how to manage employee traffic. These are just a start. And as we learn more, I'm sure some of these recommendations will change. So like they said with PPE, always check with the CDC or OSHA websites for updates. They've done an amazing job with their website. It's very user-friendly and easy to navigate. And we just wanted to try to get ahead of it for you, but things are going to be changing. I'm sure when you listen to this, something's already changed. So OSHA or CDC are two great resources. As Jill said, though, in terms of transportation program, the biggest challenge supply chain professionals are going to have to figure out is what are your sourcing strategies? Forecasting, budgeting, inventory, etc., are going to be extremely difficult in this new normal. In order to help, we've created a template of data that we believe is going to be vital for you to know about your past freight performance. Now, if you're a regular listener to Consulting Logistics, you already know the importance of great data. But to speak to why it's important and how the freight profile template we created will help you out, I've asked Steve Aborn to join the show. So, Steve, we recently made a freight profile template just to help prepare shippers for the upcoming capacity issue. Why do we believe there's going to be an issue occurring?
Yeah, sure. So I think as a lot of these businesses start to come back on, right? And if you take a step back, 4 months, whatever it was, March, when things started to calm down, immediately there was a huge capacity spike, right? And I think what you're seeing is a bunch of different things going on, but part of it is reduced labor forces at carriers, right? We've done a lot of kind of reporting and talking about that with our clients. I mean, everyone from drivers to support staff have been, sometimes furloughed, sometimes laid off, sometimes, just not working, right? So there's kind of lower capacity in the market. Truck drivers, as we all know, are the average age of a truck driver is 59 and a half, 60 years old. So they're, some of them are at risk people. So some of the independent truck drivers, they're not coming back to work. They're trying to stay safe, stay home, and kind of ride this out. So I think first is the capacity isn't potentially there as businesses start to come back online. I think the other thing that you're going to want to take a peek out for is just the network imbalances of some of these carriers, right? So a lot of freight, a lot of the way the freight moves is companies are pairing backhauls with head hauls, right? And so they're trying to move in circles. They plan and they price and they try to win business so that they can move as efficiently as possible. And now you're seeing a lot of kind of a very disjointed pattern for shippers, right? Some shippers are shipping, other shippers are not shipping. So that leads to, big network imbalances. So sometimes, especially in the truckload mode where you might have a lot of trucks, right? You don't necessarily you might not have any trucks, right? So I think there's capacity challenges, there's network challenges. And I also think there's a lot of challenges on the shipper side, right? Companies are coming back on. There's some of these companies are starved for revenue, right? Look at all the losses we've seen, the unemployment numbers. So companies want to come back and start to make revenue so that they can put that in their bank account, pay their bills, pay their employees. So I think on a high level you could see a rush to shipping, right? So a lot of folks really looking to move capacity as all of these businesses start to come back online at the same time. A reduced workforce, and also some network imbalances on the carrier side. So I think when you kind of think about that, we definitely see a scenario, kind of similar to what we saw at the beginning of COVID.
Now, regular listeners of Consulting Logistics know if they've heard you talk, you preach the value of data.
Mm-hmm.
And if they listened earlier, or when they were listening earlier to Jill, she talked about how important the clients and the shippers who had data were able to kind of get ahead of COVID and be able to handle all this stuff. So as we think about the future and we see this kind of data capacity crunch happening, what data is vital or what data is going to be vital for a shipper to get, especially right now
Sure.
before this issue occurs?
Sure. I think it's kind of it's two parts, honestly. I think there's kind of the planning part, right? So you want to be able to go to your carriers in order to secure this capacity, right? Because they're going to be we talk about it all the time. So much of this is planning, right? So if you're able to go to the carriers and say, hey, this is what I'm anticipating. Here are the lanes. Here are the volumes. Here's when I'm going to send it. You have a much better shot at locking in stable rates and capacity to move that freight. So I think step one is kind of having the data and being able to communicate effectively with the carriers and show them what exactly you're going to do, and then they'll let you know whether they're going to be able to service it or not. I think the other point with data is data and visibility, right? So as these networks come back online, are you able to track shipments? Do you know where your freight is? Are you able to get ahead of problems, right? We saw a lot of problems a couple months ago in terms of rates, capacity, trapped freight, lost freight, missing freight. So, I think those are kind of two things that you should be looking out for. As we're starting to reopen, is do I have the right shipment data to share with carriers so that I can get capacity? And then once I'm in this live environment, do I have the right data to be able to react and be able to have an agile, flexible supply chain.
Get prepared today. Visit abornandcode.com/reopening to get the guide today. And at the end of the guide, we do offer a free freight benchmark with an Aborn expert. So something you don't want to miss out on. Great visibility only occurs with a great data strategy. And with so much uncertainty in the industry, you're going to need to know for a fact how you perform. Don't hesitate, reach out today. Reach out to me, your host, Kyle, at abornandcode.com, and I'll get you started right away. It's going to be fast changing. It's going to be difficult to keep up with, and especially as you start to revamp and get things moving, it's going to be difficult. So definitely reach out today. So again, if you want to get the guide, go to abornandcode.com/reopening. Link to that in the show description underneath. Thanks for watching Consulting Logistics. I'm Kyle MacNaught. Rock and roll.